Okay, so whenever I was growing up, we would go fishing at the spillway, and I remember the first time that I ever butchered a fish. It was not the prettiest sight, I'll just let you know that much. But I had a really good teacher, and that was my uncle. And so what I want to help you now with is pushing that knowledge forward. With any kind of fish that you get, especially if you're in Mississippi in the north part, you need to catch it, or you need to get it from a very good fishmonger, which is a fisherman that sells fish. I can't stress enough though that there's a few things that you have to look for with a fish. You need to make sure that, number one, the skin is not oily. This fish right here, if you can see, very fresh, very vibrant. For number two, one thing that you always look at, I know this is kind of a little bit weird for you, but you got to look into the eye of the fish. You want it to be translucent. If it's a little bit hazy, that means the fish is about 2 to 3 days old. And so that's what is a big key for your freshness. And then lastly, you can look at the gills. If the gills are very ruby red, then guess what? It has a lot of oxygen, which means it has a lot of blood still left in it, which means, again, it is fresh. Any fishmonger, whenever you ask them or whenever you buy a fish, they can, of course, scale it for you, and they can also take out the innards. So I actually asked my fishmonger to do the same thing, and it's going to help me to now fillet this fish even that much faster and be a little bit more proficient. So some things that we need to be ready for this is that I'm going to lift up the cutting board ever so slightly. So what I have down is a wet towel, and when I put my cutting board on top, it allows my cutting board not to move because it has a little bit of suction. From here I have a little bit of a fillet knife, water, tweezers, and then also some shears, kitchen shears. So whenever you're first butchering a fish, you need to lay it on its side, of course. Don't need to lay it up here or on the bow. But we'll be using our butchering shears, and there's two gills, two fins on the bottom right here. And so we need to go all the way through to where the gills are on the outside. So I'm going to turn the fish over, and we're going to go straight down the center. And what this is going to allow to do is actually to fillet it that much easier. So now this opens everything up. From here on the back, on the top side, I'm going to take some of these spines off. What this will help you is that you don't stab yourself as well. Sometimes you got to get really tough into it. Okay. So now we're ready to go. If you're right-handed or left-handed, it's going to depend on what side you like to go for or what side you're more comfortable with. I'm right-handed, so I actually like to go from the top down, but seeing that I am going to be showing you both sides, we're going to go on the right side of the fish. First and foremost, you need to make an incision on the end tail, and it needs to be straight across. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut into it and then pull out. And so what I'm feeling with the knife is a little bit of the bone. And now under the gill, we're going to lift up this little gill just like this. We're going to go at a 45-degree angle going through it. So lift up, push through, slice, and then right where this one was, slice. So now we have two cuts, and we're going to start on the back of the spine. And whenever you make or you're filleting a fish, it needs to be long cuts all the way through. You don't need to start and then do this and then go through there. It needs to be one long cut. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start with the edge here. Point, I'm just going to go through. And there's a little bit of scale still left on the fish, so I've hit those quite a few times. But I'm going to go again right back through. Same place where I had. All right, there we go. Finally got through the scales. And so that first incision where I made behind the gills, I've now connected the dots, just like in a coloring book. And now I'm going to pull around my finger just up and down, because it's going to help loosen it up. And there's a very important key whenever you're butchering a fish, is that one hand needs to be able to pull some of that fish back so then you can see where you're cutting, so then the other hand can push through. And again, long strokes. So So I'm feeling for where the rib cage is. Again, where my previous slice was is now where my new slice is. All right, gonna go back and just detach this just a little bit more. And so again, as I'm going, I'm pulling my fingers along, and now I can see where I need to be slicing at. Going through a little bit of that rib cage. Sometimes you will get into the bones, and there's nothing wrong with that. Always go where your previous slice was. Slice you off. Go where the tail is. Sometimes, again, whenever you have those scales on, it's going to be a little bit hard to cut through it. Just keep pushing through it. All right. And now I'm going to take a little bit of the belly off, which is there. And from here, you have a very beautiful fillet. We're going to put this on our plate here, and then we're going to do the same exact thing to the other side. So now I'm going to flip it over, get any stuff off, put it into my water. This is a little bit easier. Start from the top now and go down. First, you got to make your cut on the end of the fish. Make sure you cut through the bone. Lift up that wing. Go right through at a 45-degree angle. Make sure you slice all the way through to the top of the spine, and then also to the bottom where it detaches. Use the point of your knife. I'm going to follow it all the way along. Okay, again, I'm just using the tip of my knife to now go all the way down. Another thing I want to mention too, whenever you're filleting a fish, your other hand that you're not using needs to be flat. It does not need to be like this, because if you flip, you're cutting yourself. So always flat, pointing up, but give a little bit of pressure by pushing down. All right, so now we made our first cut. Now we're going to go back to our long cuts. Now I'm feeling it all the way through. All right. I want to attach this, get below that esophagus bone. All right. So now, as you can tell, this is our fillet that now I'm going to follow all the way down. And so this is why it's very, very useful for your other hand to be here. And sometimes you have to lean over into the fish. So I'm just going to follow that. Guess what? Go right back, do long strokes, a little bit of pressure. And if you see also, my finger is on the back side of the spine of the blade, because this allows me to put just that little bit of pressure that you need to go through whenever you're filleting a fish or any meat. All right, so we still need to detach a little bit here. And again, making long cuts all the way through. And then just folding it over. If you can see this a little bit better this way. And the fish will run on you just like this one's doing, but just, again, long cuts, make it nice. So now we have 2 fish fillets. Both on the plate. With the end of your fish here, a little bit of meat left on. We'll get that later. We can make fish stock with this. Make a little attraction like that. But now what we need to do, you're gonna have some bones that are gonna be on the middle of it. Where are my tweezers? And you need a little bit of water. So what you'll do, you'll feel along and just barely pull your finger going toward the tail of the fish. So as I'm doing that, I'm feeling, You need to use tweezers and then pull out the bones, so then whenever you cook the fish, you actually won't have any bones in the fish. So whenever you're pulling out, you need to make sure that you go where the bone is going. So this bone is going this way if you're looking where my tweezers are at, so I'm going to pull where the bone is going. Hold the fish fillet just ever so slightly, and then feel where the bone is, grab it, pull out. Another thing, a little trick I like to do, I like to put the bones in between my middle finger and then also my pointing finger, just because I know where all the bones are, and then I'll put them into one vessel whenever I finish. So this does take a little bit of time. It's going to take you about 3 minutes per fillet if the bones are stingy, you don't have any good tweezers. If not, you can go very, very quickly. So with our 2 fish fillets, one thing is that I'm going to actually keep this one skin on. And whenever you have a whole fish fillet and you're going to keep the skin on, what you need to do, you need to actually cut right into the center of it. And the reason being is that toward the tail end of the fish fillet is a little bit thinner. And so if I cook this entire fish fillet as one, guess what? It's going to overload the pan. Sometimes your pan is actually not big enough for the entire fish fillet, and this end right here will be overcooked and this end will be undercooked if you pulled it out at the same time. So whenever you are again using the skin and you're keeping it on to then pan sear that skin, what we're going to be doing is just cutting it straight in the middle. And so now you have 2 fish fillets, to which is a little bit easier for you to gauge whenever you are pan searing that skin. But what if you go, Burton, well, I don't really want to keep the skin on. How do I take the skin off then? So whenever you're taking the skin off, one thing that I like to do is that you always start on the tail end and you always make an incision back toward the tail. And you're also going to do it at a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to cut right back down till I get to the skin. And if you notice what I did, I just twisted my blade up. So when I twist my blade up, now I can see where the skin is. And then from here, this is going to be my holding point for my fingers. So then I'm going to push through, and whenever you're going through a fish fillet, your blade needs to be at a 45-degree angle, so you're going against the skin. If you go up at a 45-degree angle, you're going to slice through the fish, and that's not going to be good. So started here, went back at a 45, went straight up. Now I have finger holds, so I'm going to slice just a little bit into it, pull up to make sure that I am on the fillet. Again, if I'm looking at it, making sure that I'm good. And once I know that I can actually hold it with my thumb, that's when I'm going to go through it. And if you see, I'm not really moving except for my knife hand. I'm holding this as straight as I can. Getting a little bit taut for myself. So one of the fillets I actually kept the skin on out of the 2 entire fillets. One of the fillets actually had a little bit of skin left on it, and say what happens with the skin is left on. We will show a little bit of how you go about that. But the biggest thing is that you need to make sure that you curve your blade into it, and you're gonna have to slice a little bit of that meat off. But once you get it, again, as we were talking about with pulling back the skin with your fingers to be able to see your next cut, barely cuts and you're going with the fillet. So essentially you're letting the knife rest on the fillet, lift it up ever so slightly and just barely push through it, pushing down. Again, you don't want to have your fingers here, you want to have it flat up, pushing down ever so slightly. But what we have here is going to be 2 whole fillets that we butchered down into 4. Very, very, very easy to cook this way. Also very easy to freeze if you are freezing your fish, because now this allows for you to have a minimal portion to where it's not overloading a huge piece of your freezer. And lastly, whenever you do cook, it's easier for yourself, because if you have a filleted fish this big, guess what? It's going to be too big for the pan, and then one part's going to cook, one part's not. So always with your fillets butchered into halves, and you can keep your skin on, you can keep your skin off, however you prefer. But with that being said, we just butchered a fish, and I'm very happy that you were able to do it with me. So, au revoir.